Hello, friends, and welcome to The Wonder of It All, a podcast about the blessings and curses of success in the arts and the way that creative people wrestle with it, embrace it, reject it, ignore it, obsess over it, secretly obsess over it while pretending to ignore it, and so on and so on and so on. I'm your host, Sean Nelson. My guest today is DC Pierson, a writer, actor, comedian, and all-around polymath of the performing arts. He was a founding member of the sketch comedy group Derrick, along with his NYU classmates Dominic Dierks and Donald Glover. They were one of the first such groups to benefit from the then-new technological advent, which you may have heard of, called YouTube. That breakthrough led to the group writing and starring in the feature film Mystery Team, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2009. We talk a lot about the before and aftermath of that experience and discuss the extensive work that DC has pursued in the years since, including the writing of 2 novels, writing and performing multiple one-man stage shows, stand-up comedy, TV writer, erstwhile podcaster, and actor for hire in films, TV shows, and several commercials. His career might be better described as a careers, but all the work he does is infused with the dauntless perseverance of the born trooper, my favorite kind of performer. He's also funny and thoughtful, and though a lot of people in show business use this term as an epithet, I certainly don't mean it that way. He's an incredibly nice guy, and we had a great conversation, so I hope you enjoy it. DC Pierson, it is a pleasure to have you here in this elaborate studio.
I'm so thrilled to be here. And as somebody that used to have a podcast myself, that I did entirely by myself, studio. Way to go, studio.
I know, it's what I was holding out for. I wanted to talk about your cooking podcast, but now we can't.
It doesn't.
Now I'm not even allowed to.
Don't even mention it, because then that might lead to, through a series of domino effects, me restarting it, and I can't. We don't need another project.
It's free.
The arms that I've cut off need to stay cut off.
Is that why you stopped doing it?
Oh, because it was a ton of work? Yeah, totally. I stopped a couple months before we had a kid, because I was just like, I really like it. There's like a decent amount of people that really like it too. It just was like, it never quite was, it was either going to have to be like the answer I gave my father-in-law, which is sort of when I have to boil down the most pragmatic version of myself.
Like, how does this help my granddaughter?
Literally, yeah, exactly, which is like a really good thing to stay in touch with.
Yeah.
It's at a point now where I either need to put a lot more work into it or stop doing it completely.
Right. You kind of took what I think of as the polymath approach to, life in the arts, because you act and you write and you make lots of stuff, and you always have. But now you've been doing all of those things for a long enough time that I wonder if you have had an encounter with that notion that, like, well, maybe I should have chosen one thing. Have you had that? Has it, or actually, did anybody ever recommend that you do that?
Oh, only every day.
Yeah.
But I think that and mostly internally, but also I keep feeling that there's this in Bushwick. Sometimes I'll walk by on the way to the store that I like. I'll walk by this kind of old school, like second floor New York business where it literally says they still have a sign, and I think the business is still functioning, where it says like travel agency, car insurance, passport photos, whatever,
waxing.
Where I've taken a photo of it previously, and the caption that I would put on it, I've never put it anywhere. It's just like, sometimes this feels like what my personal brand is. It's sort of like,
right.
Hey, maybe you should just like focus and do one thing.
I mean, my experience with that exact approach was, I would tell myself, and I meant it, I want to do all of these.
Yeah.
Like, I don't, like, doing music was and is a thrill. It's a joy to be able to do it, but to only do it would mean no writing, no acting, like no any of this other stuff, because all of those things were so interesting to me and always super enjoyable. Whether or not I was like really great at any of them, it's not for me to say, I guess, but like I felt great while doing them. And was that your kind of method as well, that you just didn't want to not do any of those things?
Yeah, it's like, if I really try to like think about like what was the rollout of liking all the different stuff, the first thing I probably liked was not even writing, but just reading.
Mm-hmm.
And it's as basic as this because my mom used to read to me every night. And so you just form this sort of like core memory of like, oh, I really like this. I enjoy this. And then I got good at reading myself really early. And that kind of set this trajectory of just like being really good at reading was kind of the skeleton key to just being good at like school as like a skill, because it is kind of its own skill, as I'm sure you can relate to. It's just like being good at school is kind of a thing that doesn't even necessarily relate to a whole lot of other stuff in life. But then that led to like writing too. That's like being good at reading often can lead to just like being more conversant in writing, and then really liking to do that and being like, oh, I'm generating my own little, like I can make a little magic trick of this. I'm writing something and it kind of feels like the things that I read, and this is exciting, and look at that. And then I guess concurrent with that would be like liking movies, and then getting into like summer, being like, I want to do like school plays and stuff. And that, which I feel like this is all a fairly common trajectory for like people like us. And then I think also too, when I was applying to colleges and then being like, oh, I really like performing, like I like acting. I've done a ton of plays in high school and I've done like improv and stuff. But the thing that I know that I'm best at is writing. And that's something that I've always been really good at, and really enjoyed. And so it's going like, I think that's probably where I will at least try to like focus and like choose to study. So they've always been fairly intertwined. And then where they all really overlapped, I feel like when I got to college was in comedy.
Because writing and performance are, I mean, they're not the same. They tend to attract really different people, and they're obviously different disciplines. But like, was that part of it that you, because you also, I mean, I saw you do DC Pierson is Bad at Girls. I've seen your sort of stage work doing, I mean, it's performance, but it's really more like performance as a delivery method for your writing.
Right.
That's been a funny way. Is it more that you just are not necessarily satisfied trying to act the canon? Like, are you sad that you never got to play the Dane?
I think in a weird way that's just part of I feel it now, and I don't know how you feel, but I feel now more like, oh, I almost feel like a little bit underdeveloped as an actor, or I would have liked to like tend to that side more, or be like, my wife is an actor who actually like studied acting, and she's also a comedian, and in her work she brings to bear so much actual like acting and performance skill. Whereas I think about the stuff that I've like done well, I think, but is in a fairly limited range of like awkward guy or like bad barista at the coffee shop, in a commercial that's like not for coffee. It's just for like an example of like this, you don't want this, you want this other unrelated.
Right, exactly. Try the military-industrial complex.
And I have sold a lot of military-industrial complex.
Yeah, that's why I got mine.
But like in a weird way, I sort of feel like, oh, I would have liked to develop that more, and I still would like to develop that side of things more, of just being a straight up, just having more of a like toolbox. But also, I think, especially since COVID and a lot more of auditioning has become something where you like put yourself on tape, and all actors now have like a sad backdrop on like a couple of sad sticks in our apartment, and like a ring light that we all like had to get, that makes us all feel like, where we flick the ring light on and then we see why we're not influencers. It's horrifying. And some of it I think is just like neuroses, and like it's really hard to watch yourself back. But other things, there are certain like game tape elements where I look at auditions of mine that I've taped and I go like, oh yeah, okay, I shouldn't do that. I should try to do this other thing.
Right.
And then maybe get to do that. And so I do feel like I'm getting better at it, but then it retroactively makes you feel like, I wish I'd figured that out a while ago. And I think most people feel like they're bad at auditioning. Most people would like to be better. And also I think most people feel how you feel. I certainly do, where like the sort of a lot of the biggest stuff in my career in terms of as an actor have just been somebody being like, hey, I know you, I think you would be good in this.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard actors talk about auditioning as a thing that they no, I've never heard anybody say they love it, though I'm sure some people do, but it's not, I mean, you couldn't call it an art form, but it certainly is a discipline that is its own self-contained thing that really doesn't necessarily even have any relevance to the performance it is its own performance. And trying to assume what you're going to like if I'm auditioning for you, that requires me to have a sense of who you are or what you want. And I would say that as I've gotten older, it has become increasingly difficult to have any sense of what anybody wants or thinks about anything ever. Right. And that really has stunted my ability or desire to put myself in the world at all anymore. And I've been pretty quiet, like hermity for the last, 6-7 years, in a way that when I was, 19 through, 40 would have been unthinkable because I was such a fucking insufferable loudmouth. And, in a way, I always felt like, well, just getting back to the idea of like, don't you wish you had focused on one thing and become great at it? I always felt like, I'll get this performance thing out of my system because obviously it is lesser than writing. It's not as vaunted and impressive and important. I only think that about myself. I don't like if I see a great performance by an actor, I am totally reverent about it, and it really does affect me powerfully, both because of it being great and also because of God, I could never do that just to make it about myself. but yeah, it does kind of come back to the question of why do you even want to do this stuff at all? And there was a long time where it would never have occurred to me to ask that question because what do you mean? Right. What else is there? Right. And that's something they always say about, I would say that the ecology of people giving showbiz advice to aspiring people has certainly outstripped the world of entertainment in a certain way. It's definitely true about the music business. But they always say, well, if you have some other choice, then, you obviously shouldn't even do it. If, you need to bleed for it and it has to be the only thing you would ever do. And I was fine with that idea for a long time until I was like, well, there are lots of other things that you could do. I can't think of any because that's still the only stuff that feels real to me as a kind of it rings true to me as a kind of work. But have you ever asked yourself that question?
I can think of one really defined just sort of time period, which was in the sort of early lockdown phase of COVID, where I think a lot of people were like, wait, so many of the external signifiers of who I am do not exist. They're not available to me right now. I was doing a improv show every week that I would go do that I'd been doing for 10 years, or I would go and audition in person for commercials and occasionally film and TV stuff. And all of those things just did not exist anymore. So I had I think a lot of people did that moment of being wait, why do I do what I want to do? And what even is that? For me, I think it also kind of came down to what's the stuff that you really, if you just had to be I would only do this. And then for me, again, that weirdly came back to writing stuff. Even though the writing part of it, I had been working for a really long time, say on trying to develop my first book into a movie. And we'd been developing other projects and we'd been trying to get screenplays and stuff out the door and TV projects and all these things that were writing focused. And I also hadn't written a book in a long time and I really wanted to get back to doing that. And I think it really did come back to well, that would be the thing, right? That would be the thing that if I didn't do that more, I would feel really, really bummed out about it. But then also that has never, with a lot of the screenwriting stuff, not selling anything or me not having finished a book in a long time, none of that had been my main source of income. A big source of income for me had been auditioning for and booking the occasional commercial. And that was also how me and my wife would get health insurance for a long time. Right. And now that we have a kid, it's still how we get health insurance. Sure. And I had to kind of look at both of those things and be I think that's true that if I didn't, say, try to get another book out there in the world eventually, or maybe get to sell a screenplay or a TV show or whatever that I had written, I would feel sad about that. And then also I have to look at this other thing that I do, which is like playing a goofy guy in commercials and go like, I think I have to really acknowledge how cool that is and that I love that. And that's a really incredibly lucky thing to get to do. And that it's been really good to me for so long, and going like, why am I good at that? What do I like about it? And so it was a weird thing of going like, I do really love this, and I do feel like this is my reason for being on Earth with like the writing thing, as silly that is to say. And I also have to look at playing a goofy guy in commercials and go like, oh yeah, you like love that too. And that is sort of like, as much as you might have higher ambitions to like, I would have liked to have been the fifth lead on a TV show, or I would have liked to have been the hacker on a weekly procedural who's sort of in the gang, but he's like a little bit edgy and he's got green fingernails and he occasionally looks up from the computer and goes, I'm in. Like, as much as I have like higher ambitions for what it is that I do, I had to acknowledge like, that's such a cool thing to get to do for a large chunk of your living.
Yeah. I mean, identity kind of is at the heart of a lot of this stuff because, I mean, obviously the self has really become the central subject of really all human endeavor in the last little while, whereas that, I think, was frowned upon, like, for a long time as a thing that was just indulgent. You're just thinking about yourself, but wouldn't necessarily harm people to examine themselves and ask the question of, why do I do what I do? Why do I like what I like? All that stuff. And I mean, there's a neurotic end of that spectrum, and let's explore that.
Please.
But like the whole thing of how your identity is formed by your achievements and how other people view your achievements, it seems so central to all kind of creative work, and certainly with actors. I mean, writers, it's true as well, but writing is just a different thing because you really are working it out in your most sort of private thoughts for so much of the, and then when it's done, people can weigh in or not. And I would like to explore the question of how reading has changed in the last little while, but let's stick to identity. Let's stick to the self for a minute. But you know, like for a long time, you maintained a particular look that you have modified to a degree, but like you had really long hair.
Right.
And I mean, I often wondered, was that partly because it made you sort of typeable in that kind of realm? Or did you just think it looked good? Because obviously it looked great.
I want to retroactively say that it was because of the famous Lil Stevie Van Zandt quote where he said, if you don't have a look, get one.
Right.
And that I heard that and I was like, all right, Stevie, I'm on it. But I do think, thinking back on it, I was like, oh, there is some wisdom to that. And to a certain degree, I have been a like guy with a beard and somewhat long hair, although right now it's literally like the shortest it's been in a really long time.
Yeah.
Because, that does make me fit into a type, but it's only really in the past couple of years that I've gone like, it's not necessarily bad for what I do to a little bit turn yourself into a cartoon character.
Right.
But a lot of the having a beard and long hair, I think, was just, I don't want to say neglect. What am I thinking of?
Neglect,
yeah, exactly. Where I really think for a long time,
passive resistance.
Didn't necessarily, when I was in, it's not like, this isn't, this. I feel like this is going to make it sound much more dramatic or heavy than it was, but like my mom died when I was in middle school. Mm-hmm. And when I think about it, there was some degree of like, just kind of being unkempt or whatever you want to say, that was a little bit like in Home Alone, where Macaulay Culkin's parents are gone and he's doing all this stuff and he's like eating popcorn and jumping on the bed and I'm eating popcorn on the bed, you better come stop me.
Right.
And there was a certain amount of just sort of like, when you go home, your mom says like, hey, get a haircut, hey, shave, hey, whatever. And this is like overdetermined. But there's a part of me, I've realized that, where it's like, I'm waiting for somebody to come and say, hey, I'm looking at you and your hair's too long and you need to cut your beard.
That rings completely true to me. Or as my mother would phrase that exact thing, like, oh, your hair. You are not going out of the house looking like that. But no, I mean, if you are not a kind of classically beautiful person like myself, and you still want to work in show business, you can still do it. But there is a thing about,
you heard it here first.
There is a thing about sort of making yourself distinctive, whether or not it's kind of classically correct as a somewhat of a response. I mean, like there's, of course, all kinds of people and all kinds of looks that have a way of being, but there is an element, I think, particularly in film, television, acting, where some of it is just a way of saying, this is, like, if you want me, this is me. And that takes a certain amount of nerve, I think, a certain amount of self-possession, or maybe it is just benign neglect.
I think it was started as benign neglect that ended up being working, I think, mostly in my favor. And I experienced it once on a job where I had it was a commercial, and I had just auditioned recently at the time for I think it was either a film or TV role, and then I heard which I didn't hear a lot, it's down to you and one other person, it really could be you, it really could whatever. And then they said and at the time my hair was a lot longer and my beard was a lot longer, and they were they're just wondering the beard, do you need, and I was whatever, take it off,
exactly.
Put it on, whatever.
Wax.
I think also, what do you want? Just unroll a big thing of mustaches.
You want me to tap dance? I'd be happy to.
Yeah, exactly. And so and they still to this day, in all kinds of auditions, but particularly commercial auditions, will be and would you be willing to shave? Would you be whatever? And I really have to stop myself from just being what? Yeah, I don't.
Duh. What are you talking about?
And to just seem like I have some level of self-respect is my greatest acting job of all. The greatest role I play is somebody with a modicum of self-respect.
Kid, you got the goods.
And then they told me hey, you got it. And I was oh, great. And they were yeah, you're going to have to shave. I was okay, no problem. And then for whatever reason, I was just so, it had been, the beard thing had been so in my head recently. I was I think I just lost this other part because of it. Whatever. I really want to, show up and just do the best job I can. I shaved and then went to the costume fitting. And I got there and the director came out to greet me at this production company office. And he saw that I didn't have a beard anymore and his face just fell. And I literally said, please don't fire me. I'll be really funny, I swear.
Speaking of identity, where are you with that? I mean, it must be just all in the game, right?
Yeah, it's just, it's silly and it's frothy and it's, people are too attuned to the little micro whatever, just because that's the world that they're in. Mm-hmm. But then realizing when you think of the alternatives, some alternatives, I should say, because there's also a part of me always that's just go to culinary school,
Right. Learn a trade.
But that in terms of getting to do this and getting to have the thing be and then they were worried because I didn't have a beard and I really still wanted the job and I was worried that they were going to fire me because I didn't have the beard anymore and I would have screwed it up. Then getting to just really to go do it and then have stuff happen on that job, getting to go and we're it's literally filming in the old LA Times building in downtown LA where they're well, the LA Times isn't enough of a thing anymore to have all of these floors because journalism's not as much of a thing anymore. So now we just film commercials here. And you just go well, thank God I'm doing this. And then now we're kind of facing, I said, our own dilemma of that. But it is a little, and then filming it and then being okay, we're gonna take this cast out and bring in the Spanish speaking cast where it's it's all of the characters, but this is the, for the kind of Latinx market. Mm-hmm. And so and then being that's cool. Right. I love this. Right. I love that we're mirrors of each other and that's the us, that's that, and we're the them. And this is crazy. This is wild. This is really funny and weird. And I think this is why a lot of actors are weird, is because it is weird to have a lot of people appraise you and sort of be are we liking him? That it's not personal, it's not personal. You're it feels so personal.
Yeah, and in what sense is it not personal when it's your actual physical person? But then in another way, it really isn't.
The best way I can boil it down is something that a friend of mine who was an improviser or is an improviser and is in comedy and also works in advertising on that side of the table in the sort of ad agency space. He told me once, he was I tell a lot of people this, friends of ours that are acting in commercials. I was being on that side of it, they put as much thought into who they're going to cast in the roles as they do the furniture. But they put a lot of thought into the furniture. Where he's right, where you really do feel that degree where you're just like, this is just going to be a little 10, 15, 30 second peek into a world, and everything that's just sort of visually in that world has to kind of go together and tell a certain little story. And so it just has to kind of be what it is. And if they really liked this person and they feel like, well, does are you going to be taller than whatever or shorter than, or then they really like this couch.
Right.
And if you and the couch don't go together, they might be like, well, we really like the couch.
Yeah.
But, and that was sort of a beautiful little distillation of it for me, where it was like, oh yeah, it's all kind of just, they're just peeking into a little egg world.
Right. That's not something that would ever once occur to you, that like, oh God, I hope I match the sofa. But that's real. And also the most sophisticated viewer is not necessarily even going to be attuned to like gradients of color and how they match or clash or whatever, that are in a funny way just as important as the most sort of emotional performance or whatever like that. It actually all does matter.
Right.
It just doesn't matter to me.
No, exactly.
In any way. But it does, like, it does.
And if they have to fly the couch out because they're like, the couch isn't working, the couch isn't going to go home and be
much harder
like,
to replace. No couch ever killed us. That's why you walk around Hollywood, you see all those couches just sitting out on the saddest story of all. But yeah, I mean, like, this is all sort of, the way you're talking about it now is a pretty evolved perspective based, I would imagine, on the fact that you have been doing it long enough that, like, you've had the successes, you've had the sort of rejections, whatever, you've been through it enough times to not necessarily feel like terrible about yourself, I'm assuming. Have you learned how to do that? Because that, I never got there.
So this is something my wife and I talk about all the time, which is like when members of our extended families or people that we know that are not in the entertainment industry or the arts or whatever will be like, gosh, I can't imagine doing that. There's just all that rejection, like all the people, you have to kind of put this whole thing together, and you go in and you perform, and then they get to say yes or no, and they probably say no. That must be really hard. I can't imagine doing that. That must be really hard. And you want to be like, it is.
No fucking shit.
It is really hard. And the thing of people be like, it probably hurts less after a while. And then you go, oh no, I think it hurts not more, but like
but not less.
The same and different.
Right.
And then there are genuinely times where you're sort of like, it's all in the game, whatever, that one didn't work out, like, and you can be more circumspect. And then there are times where it really hits home. It's almost like you can't really map it on like, it hurts less over time. It's sort of like is bumpier.
I mean, it actually is similar to the thing about like when you've done something, the people who read their reviews or don't read their reviews, or how they kind of assimilate getting bad reviews and are like, I don't care. Like, this doesn't affect me. Like, why give those assholes the satisfaction or whatever, versus the people who are, of course, like, oh God, they said I was adequate, but even worse is the people who are like, they said I was adequate right there. It's like the range of responses that are, I mean, of course, in terms of sort of feeling good about what you're doing and the many things that are in the world that can rob you of that feeling, that's like that thing of rejection, that thing of going up for things that objectively you wouldn't necessarily choose to do or choose to want or whatever. But then if you're in the running, to be told that, no, I think someone else will better represent the world of this hemorrhoid ointment, like, I mean, you were great, don't get me wrong. It's just they went a different way. They wanted someone who was willing to shave or whatever. But like, again,
shaving is so crucial when you go into the hemorrhoid cream commercials.
Trust me. It's not necessarily your face, obviously, but that's another whole other podcast. But like, again, it does actually relate to your sense of yourself and your worth and your, like, I mean, I don't mean to hit it as hard or to suggest that somehow you are fragile, but like, people don't become performers because they're not fragile.
Right.
You know, like there is a reason that applause can feel like love until you realize it doesn't or whatever. That question of like, how can you do that? How can you live like that? That's a real question, even in the world where everybody sort of thinks they're at least at the edges of the business or could do what everybody does, you know, just as well as they.
And they might not be wrong.
Yeah, that's true. But I am curious about how this sort of evolved perspective connects to when you were younger and sort of presumably more ambitious or differently ambitious or like really looking to kind of establish yourself?
Yeah, I think if I just let myself be contented with, hey, I went and played an ice cream man in a Verizon commercial, like I have, that if I just went to that and was like, that was great, I loved that day, that was so cool, I'm so lucky that I got to do that, that if I fully just felt that way, that I would be a failure, that I would create the conditions of my own ultimate failure because I would be like, if you're satisfied with that, then you must not want it bad enough or you must not want to get where you want to go badly enough. And I think as I've gotten older and done more stuff where I just sort of go like, and then I just go do that. And if I'm okay with just that, is that going to just make me not want to go do more or better things? And realizing like, I guess for lack of a better whatever, like, yeah, you don't know if when you're driving home from going out to the beach in Malibu and playing a couple that just bought a lighthouse and is going to have a Best Buy guy go inside their lighthouse and install an HD TV, like I also have done. If you don't know if you're driving home from that and you like just fiddle with the stereo and you fly off the PCH and like die, that could happen. And then you never would have been like, I like this. This is good. Isn't my life wonderful?
Right.
Yeah, you probably need to just let yourself be happy sometimes. Or just be sort of satisfied with what's in front of you sometimes for a lot of reasons.
How do you do that? I think that's incredibly perceptive and real because it is like, on the one hand, there's this many people and there's this many jobs, and getting any of those jobs, it's not necessarily a reflection of your inherent quality as an actor or as a person, but like certainly we can say it's better than not getting it, you know, for a variety of reasons. But then once you have it and you're like, God, am I really the fucking lighthouse guy? Am I really the... But then again, also there's the thing where like the Geek Squad guy winds up being the person who produces your one-man show of 7 Brides for 7 Brothers or whatever. I don't mean to spoil your... I know that's your big project, but you know, like...
It's actually called 7 Puppets, 6 Other Puppets, 1 Brother.
Brides. But really what we're talking about is like, am I just this? Because you really work to get anything, and it's like almost impossible to do. There is an element of luck, but there is an element of talent, but really it's a thing of like, if you don't try, you don't do it. But then having done it, that thing of like, is this really all I'm ever going to be? It still connects to this inherent sense of what I do is the proof of who I am. And that like, for me, it was always a thing of if I didn't extend myself to some sort of performance at the risk of annoying everyone I knew or whatever, then it would just be like I was invisible and that I didn't matter and that my life, far from like being valid or not valid, but like was as likely to not ever have happened. You know what I mean? Like it's the same thing as that. And that's how it felt for a very long time. And I think this is as good a time as any to kind of get into the work you did with Derrick, your comedy group, and you guys got together when you were in college at NYU, and you were doing sketch stuff, which has become a lot more common now than it was then, but it's not like it was unheard of then. And you had this amazing kind of intersection with technology. You know, YouTube becoming real was was the thing that allowed you to become real boys,
Yeah,
you know, for lack of a better term. But like at that point, clearly you wouldn't have even been trying to do this stuff had you not had a sense of ambition and a desire to be seen and a desire to be, you know, like heralded as special in some way.
Of course, yeah, naturally.
But like the jump from performing for 37 people in a black box to like now hundreds of thousands and indeed millions of people are seeing what you're doing, which you wouldn't have even known to dream of that at that time. How did that amplify, magnify, change, or distort the kind of ambition that you had like the minute before you uploaded those videos?
Yeah, I mean, it felt really, really cool, obviously, but also one thing, or like, so exactly as you described, sort of put the videos on YouTube, not because it was like a thing that you could go viral or whatever. Like there was a vague awareness of that, but it truly was, and it's become such a cliche, but it truly was like, hey, there's like a video of like a hamster doing something cute that people will forward each other on email. That was almost the most you could imagine that. The idea that you could like create content intentionally that people would really like and share and whatever was really, really new. So we weren't doing it in that spirit. It was literally putting it on YouTube because it didn't cost anything, whereas it did cost money to host your own videos on your own website.
Right.
And then the little QuickTime logo would show up, and then it would load, and then you would hit play.
And then your computer would crash.
Yes, exactly. And then you would have to throw it away.
And then you'd be like, fuck, I'm never clicking on another.
And then you would be like, I have to go back to the Acer store to get a new computer. I can't believe this. Through that, then them getting some amount of like awareness from people and succeeding felt really, really cool. And also it sort of is like, oh, you're doing it in this new way too, which also felt really cool.
Right.
Also still being in college at that point. And I was a year younger than the other 4 people in the group, all of whom had like graduated, but pretty much by the time that it was like really sort of like, oh my gosh, this is happening. So still being in college and like getting to go to class, but then also going back to your dorm room and in a kind of the social networky kind of way, opening up your computer and be like, oh my God, I can't believe 1 million people saw this while I was in class.
Me, just a sophomore.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Or like going on a family trip and getting recognized like overseas, like coming out of a restaurant in front of like my dad, having some guy also from America, some other college kid be like, hey, are you whatever?
You're the guy who shot that lady in that video.
Yeah, there were some non-comedy videos. I had also been, like some CCTV stuff, of course, captured. But the statute of limitations was up by that time.
Best not to discuss.
And that feeling really cool. And also because my dad, and a lot of it just comes back to like, how cool did my dad think it was? Had been in and was in like, he was a like tech entrepreneur a couple times over, never in a way that was like, oh my gosh, he blew the doors off and made $1 bajillion getting his company acquired. Although that was always like the dream. So he had always been somebody who was like an early adopter and was kind of like, we were talking before we started rolling about like, how did you first like get on Twitter? My dad told me to get on Twitter.
Right.
Because he had heard about it first, because he was like super in the tech world. And he was like, you could use this to promote your movie when you're at Sundance or whatever.
Right.
And so he was always that person. So not only succeeding, but succeeding in a way where it's like, accidentally or not, you used technology in a cool new way. And then that sort of helped you get your thing out there and be successful. He thought was really cool.
Yeah.
So I extra thought it was really cool.
Yeah.
And then something I've realized in retrospect, I think, is like part of what I was feeling was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is succeeding. This is really exciting. I'm immediately telling myself like, well, I'll definitely be a millionaire by 30. So like, what do I want to do after that? Literally that kind of shit. But then also,
I'm not going to get one of those huge trailers.
No, that would
like
be
the way the other stars do. I'm going to have I'm going to keep it.
But I think some of that is just being like young and just being like, this is really, and I mean, I don't know how it felt for you also experiencing like success at an early age or whatever, but a feeling of just like how much of what I'm feeling is, this is really neat. And how much of what I'm feeling is like, I'm just at an age where like a lot of things feel exciting in the possibilities are endless kind of way.
I mean, in my case, it felt like like the tiny fraction of myself that had enough confidence to think that it was conceivable that something I did had any merit at all, in spite of the mountain of evidence to the contrary and the total absence of encouragement from anyone in my life other than the people I was in a band with.
Right.
We were all, and I especially, was like sort of a ventriloquist dummy for the kind of pervasive notion that ambition was stupid and bad and success was a lie unless it's an accident. And even then, only if you subvert it in some way. So there was a huge amount of like, yeah, I don't know, I don't really think about that kind of stuff. When in fact, that's all anybody thinks about all the time. That was probably less true then, that everybody thought about it all the time, but only slightly less on reflection. And especially with you being like you were at NYU, were you not in Tisch?
I was in Tisch, but I wasn't in acting.
Right.
I was in dramatic writing, which I think has gotten bigger since, but at the time really felt like it was like a creaky, like half floor, and just very much felt like this is a weird little forgotten corner of this like entire building that's mostly focused on like film and like acting, or like the biggies. And then this feels like sort of a weird little backwater.
But surely everyone there would have known about what was going on with you guys by the time it sort of arrived.
I think a lot of people did, and it definitely was something that was like, seemed cool or felt exciting.
So when you're sliding your meal card at Weinstein or whatever, you were like, yeah, I'll have a couple of soft serves. People are like, oh my God, he had two soft serves. How did he get that? Fuck that guy. I could do that.
Yeah, no, that the soft serves for everyone, really. No, honestly, you talk about like when you talk about like things just feeling different in like, when I moved into my sophomore year dorm, Chipotle had just opened up on St. Mark's, and it was the first Chipotle on Manhattan.
It's a great day for New York.
Exactly. In some
Culture
ways,
finally arrives.
Yeah. Andy Warhol is rolling over in his grave inside a silver burrito wrapper. I had I moved early because I'd stayed over the summer because I had already started doing like comedy stuff and stuff at like UCB, and I moved into my sophomore year dorm early, and clearly someone from the like Chipotle street team had been told, hey, here's a free burrito card, stack of free burrito cards, slide them under every door in this giant dorm, NYU dorm, and had just gone like, fuck it, and just left them in the mailroom, maybe because they weren't allowed to go upstairs.
Right.
And so I like was one of the first people to move into this building and just found a stack of Chipotle free burrito cards and it really was just like, this is
I really
great.
am special.
And I took the entire stack, and then I was like, that's wrong. And so I put half the stack back. And then truly felt like the rest of the year like De Niro walking into the Copacabana in Goodfellas, where it's like, and then he tips the kid $2 to keep the ice cubes cold or whatever, like amongst my friends, because everybody knew like I'm the free burrito connect. And it felt great. Yeah. Especially when it was like, at that time, you're like, that was like sometimes the only meal I would have in a day is a free Chipotle burrito. It was sort of like, that felt really, really cool. And all the stuff that was happening felt really, really cool. It wasn't exactly the same relationship to success that you're describing as sort of the like grunge era or coming out of grunge, like Seattle, where there truly is this sort of like, everybody obviously wants to achieve some level of success, but they have to completely disavow ever wanting it.
Right, or having tried to get it.
Yes, right. Exactly. But also it was like, I think it was early enough in what we were trying to do that it wasn't just this pipeline of like, everybody's trying to make video content that will gather a following online, where now that truly is like everything.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time too, like after we'd been doing it for a couple of years and other groups or people had started doing it and also experiencing some degree of success. And what we would do when we would go to have meetings or whatever, or try to develop things, is we would kind of go into these meetings and we would be like, look, we don't know how the internet works. Like, we just make stuff that's funny to us, and we got lucky that other people responded to it. So really what we're selling is I guess, ourselves and what we like, and as opposed to saying like we completely know how the internet works. And I remember,
and they were like, "Great, so how does the internet work exactly?" Because we really want to plug you into that.
They were like, "Yeah, whatever with you. How does the internet work?"
Yeah.
Which we didn't realize at the time is what they were thinking. But I remember saying that to somebody else and being like, "We're telling people we don't know how the internet works. We're just doing our thing, like whatever." And then them being like, "You're saying you don't know how the internet works?" Because there's this other group. They go into the meeting. They tell them they know how the internet works.
What are you afraid of making money?
Well, yeah, exactly, precisely.
Yeah.
And I think like that was, in a way I didn't realize, I think that was our version of being like, because we also didn't.
Right.
We didn't know. I still don't know.
Yeah, I mean that is, I mean, I don't know if it was always a cultural archetype, but that kind of particular kind of hustler who has one conspicuous kind of success that they could claim, whether or not it was theirs, who then goes into all of those meetings that you know, somehow get when you are credited with some kind of success, and claims to be an expert, to kind of rack up all of the sort of whatever sort of signing bonuses or like any kind of retainer fees that you can
Right.
get, and then never does another thing again.
Right.
But that's essentially a form of hustle that is a kind of success. I mean, I guess that's sort of more like the producer track than being the performer and writer track. But like, you did have a conspicuous success. I mean, when I was at NYU, it was as the state was graduating to, I mean, I don't know if they literally graduated, but like it was this famously formed in the dorm that I lived in, and then suddenly they have an MTV show. And at that point, it still seemed like being on an MTV show was like, it was either the coolest thing ever or the lamest thing ever, or what, you know, or the worst thing you could do, whatever, but it was a conspicuous success. Right. And so you being in that position, and
I'm sure exactly what it was for most people is the median, where it's like, oh yeah, that's really lame. That's really lame that you have that. I'm going to hit you with a rock over the head and kill you if that means that I get to. You know what I mean? Like that's sort of that perfect thing of like, I both am like, that's totally lame, and also like, how do I get that? Which is
how do I get that?
How
lame
I feel.
Thing?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
But when you were doing those meetings and think like, what? Obviously, it turned into making a feature film. Was that something that you had wanted before or had thought of doing before, or was it like, well, shit? I mean, maybe we should like convert and make a movie, like because obviously that seemed like a huge step.
Sure.
Whereas now, maybe it's a lateral step.
Yeah, I think like the idea that it would be like, okay, you are going to go make this movie, and then it will probably end up like one of the best case scenarios being like on the internet next to the other things that you've made.
Right.
Would not have been like on our radar or the dream, or it would have seemed like, yeah, you're right. I think it would have seemed like a lateral move. Whereas now it would be like, please, can it be?
Right. Right.
But I think at the time, ultimately the road to that was like, there started to be like, you know, attention around like, okay, there's like these viral videos on the internet, they're getting attention. People that are making them with some level of intention are getting industry attention. And then through that, we were able to like get representation and start having meetings. And I do think that we had in our heads like, how do we take this and parlay it into some larger thing, be that a TV show or a feature film or whatever, and had initially gone around and gone out to LA and pitched around a like script that we hadn't even finished, that wasn't fully baked, and had a bunch of meetings and sort of had the experience of people being like, let us know, or what else you got, or just kind of like people weren't that excited about it. And I think we were only so excited we were still kind of like trying to even build the plane of the idea as it flew. Or it also was like, it was a couple of different ideas that kind of sounded cool, but when they got the script that we had written, I think they were like, wait, what did you, because this isn't, and we were like, yeah, we just finished writing it in the hotel room. Right. I don't know what you want from us. But it was like, yeah, in retrospect, I'm like, that's kind of a cool idea in a vacuum. I understand what we even thought could be cool about that, which was like, it's on a college campus, because I think also going to NYU, which has no campus effectively, that the idea of an actual like just sort of like normal college campus was like, ooh, neat. Or when we would go to a festival or whatever. I remember we went to a festival in North Carolina once at like UNC, and just literally like beautiful rolling green, whatever, students throwing frisbees, and it really feeling like, capital C college.
Right.
And we had joked about like a kid with a giant boombox that's just playing Rites of Spring. It was like because that's really how it felt. So that was a very fascinating
world
the
standard rich and famous contract.
I just watched that for the first time in a long time last week.
It's as good as it ever was.
Absolutely. So, but basically the Warriors, but set on like a college campus. So like a group of college kids have to get from one side to the other, and have like it's an all in one night sort of a thing. And then being like, that sounds cool. Also, it was like an inverted, which seems sort of prescient now, like inverted Revenge of the Nerds, where it was a bunch of like jocks who were sort of like, nerds are like seem in charge now because of the internet and all this stuff, and they're jerks. Yeah. Which at the time I think we were a little bit like, that's like a funny inversion, and now it's like, oh no, it's everything. It's our reality. So there was that, and then ultimately none of that fully was actually like baked into the content.
Right. And those are all like notions, but none of them are like ideas all the way.
And also what we were fighting, which I think would continue to be a thing, and I think will always be a thing until the day that I die, was because we were a sketch group, having an idea and being like, I could see this being fleshed out into an 89-minute movie, but telling somebody and having them be like, oh, that's a fun idea. Sounds more like a sketch.
Right.
Like truly sounds more like a sketch, I think would be a fun thing to have engraved on my tombstone.
It's better than having "I'm not sick, I'm not well" on your tombstone, which is what's going on mine. But yeah, I mean, it's really true that you were ambitious enough creatively to do this stuff, and even to put it on a stage, but then to shoot it and edit it and then upload it and like live in that. Obviously, a short video sketch, it's not like the most like outlandish kind of throw yourself into the void and hope that the world supports it. But like it does take a certain amount of courage and confidence. Probably that is not true anymore. Probably it is like a reflex action for kids now. But at that time, there is a certain presumption of like, who the hell are you to be making a video on your video camera, whatever. The membrane between amateur and professional was much less porous and permeable then. But still, like aesthetically, like having it look as good as you could make it look and feel real as opposed to just totally dicking around. It required craft and care. But then taking that next step to being like, oh yeah, movie pitch? Right. Yeah, like, what if it was like us, but in a movie? You know, like, what do you think of that? Because it is hard to even know how to do those things, how to have an idea, how to like actually do it in a way that isn't just fantasy-based and the desire for fame and attention. But you've spoken about how Donald Glover, your Derrick colleague, had done writing on 30 Rock, and he had kind of learned a few things about rigor in that kind of writing, and he brought that to the group. Was that stuff that you were like ready to fall in line with, or were you like, don't fucking tell me how to write?
Oh no, absolutely, like 1 million, like too ready. Mm-hmm. We were in the same program. He had also been in dramatic writing, and so I had been in that world. And then when we actually were going to try to make the movie that ultimately did happen, which at that point we had decided way more, essentially because we had been told by people like, great, well, let us know when you have a movie at that point. Like, and we had decided to try to independently finance one because we had started making any amount of money, because like monetization had just kind of become maybe a thing, and we had sold some merchandising, and we had done some videos for like websites that would like pay you to make a video and put that money together. Didn't pay ourselves, and then combined that with some investment from like friends and family, and were able to put together a budget to actually make a movie. we knew, which I still believe, like, oh yeah, we were right. Like, we couldn't just then go around and be like, well, here's the set that we spent money on, and here's like the cameras and crew that we hired. And now let's figure out what's funny about this. You know, like, it's like we need to be there. Time is literally money, and we don't have very much of either. So like, let's really try to super duper figure out a tight like story and script, and the kind of lessons that he was bringing from 30 Rock of like, yeah, they're going to stay late and they're going to sit for 2 hours and think about like, is this single joke absolutely the funniest that we can make it?
Right.
Really, really, really helped, I think, the script enormously and our approach enormously. And I was very primed to do that and be that. And also, again, it helps to be 22 at that time. Like, it does help to just be like, oh, we're going to meet up at like 6 p.m. and then start having one of these sessions of like, we're trying to like punch up the script and forget that I was supposed to meet a woman that I was dating for a drink at like 9:30 and I thought I would be out by then, and it's 11 and I'm texting like, hey, I don't think I'm going to make it. And then eventually having her be like, hey, yeah, you can't do that. I'm like a human being.
Maybe don't make the plan.
What am I looking for? Yeah, I'm a person. But at the time, sort of going like, oh yeah, that sucked. That sucked that I did that. I'm sorry. But also, part
what
of
the
it,
fuck do you want from me? Don't you understand that I'm an artist working in this
there
form?
being this identity of like, I love that and I still feel that to a certain degree, but like the ability to kind of like lose time inside of a process and really try to make it as good as it can be. I still really value that, and it is the best, but now I'm a little bit like, let me try to start that earlier in the day.
Right, exactly. I mean, it does come down to that, like, you can't tear yourself away from that kind of immersive writing experience because it takes so much to make it start, you know, to actually get it going. But yeah, you do learn, like, start earlier. Don't make a plan that you will certainly have to cancel, and don't think that the sort of immensity of your apology, the number of exclamation points you put in the text, is going to make up for your lack of consideration.
Right.
But that's life lessons. That doesn't apply to the work of doing the film. And so you made the movie after having really dedicated yourself to writing it. And there are aesthetic reasons why. I mean, I happen to think that the model you were describing a minute ago of like, okay, we have 2 video cameras with like takes that are essentially, they're not infinite, but like those takes can be 45 minutes to an hour sometimes. Just let it roll. I'll think of something funny. Like, that approach has been like, it's yielded a few good things, to be sure, but it has totally dominated the landscape of not just comedy, but like, there's a whole strain of dramatic storytelling that has been dominated by that. And you come to misintentional writing. You come to misintentional language, dialogue that is there for a reason. But with comedy, it can be like, yeah, this is funny on the page. It's like, I can prove that it's funny. But then when you're doing it, maybe it is like not quite alive in the way that you would want it to be on stage or something. Like, how do you feel now about the finished film, and how did you feel then about the finished film?
I haven't seen it all the way through in a long time, but I find myself thinking about scenes from it or jokes and being like, oh yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I haven't watched it in a long time, but I would like to watch it again. And then every time it goes on to a different streaming service or premium cable thing that I didn't even know existed or whatever, I find myself being like, oh, that's really cool. I love that. I love that that's out in the mix. I love that people can access it in that way. Like we were talking about before, where it's sort of like, at the time it was like, we really want it to be a theatrical movie, and there was weird transitionary things happening with exhibition at the time that are only even more exacerbated now. And then now in this moment going like, the fact that it's even still on a server somewhere on a streaming service that people can go find it and watch it is really, really cool, as opposed to like, so we don't own it, so somebody just was like, I'm going to take the tax write-off and now your work is forever like deleted. Is crazy. So like now it's very much like, I like that it's like still out there and alive. And I think it was neat to me that we're able to write something that like had characters and a story that you like cared about, and that there were a ton of people in it that are like, we already at the time, it's funny when people are like, and then people that were in that went on to be whatever, and it's Bobby Moynihan, and it's Matt Walsh, and it's Aubrey Plaza, and it's like all these people, and they went on to be, and in my head, it's like, they already were in my head, because I've been around UCB for so long, so it's like, I already thought that they were really cool, and it was exciting to get to have, I still feel that way, so it's like, it hasn't been for me as much of a like, and it was just you guys and Matt Walsh and Aubrey all just kind of dink it. It's like, no, I already thought like these people were really great.
Yeah.
But it's neat to me that is other people's experience of it is going like, do you know all the people that are in this movie is really, really, Donald obviously included, and in many ways the most
very conspicuous.
Is really cool.
Right.
So I will be forever like so grateful that we got to do that, and also like have the experience in any time since that I've gone into one of those meetings, talking to a person across the desk who's like, in many ways, probably more successful than I am, because they're like, hey, I work at this production company. I'm the studio decision maker, or I'm whatever. I'm somewhere in the pipeline. I draw a salary. Isn't that great? And having them be like, so how did you guys, and ask a lot of these same questions and getting to kind of tell the story, and then having them be like, God, it'd be really cool to do something like that. I wish I could do something like that. And feeling like, I believe you, and I'm lucky that I was in a position at that time where I got to be a part of something like that, and sort of like, it is neat, like that we got to like take that swing and it worked out as much as it did.
Yeah, I mean, a feature film, you can't do it just by wanting to. It requires the work of tons of people and so much money, even if it's the lowest budget version of it. It is an incredible achievement just to do it. And I have been part of making several low budget, not quite no budget, but you know, like the advent of certain, you know, the Red camera, for example, all of those, like speaking
which is also
of
what we shot
technology.
Mystery Team on.
Yeah, like the things that enabled film to seem pro while being significantly cheaper than it would have been to do it the real way. That really did change a lot of things, and there was a lot of sort of cultish work that happened around that time. But the people who really stuck with it, I mean, in my experience, they're people who are, you know, reliably winning and nominated for Oscars, but who are doing this incredible work that even then I had no question that they were like amazing, great talents.
Right.
And it felt like, oh my God, I can't believe I get to fucking do this.
Yeah.
This is the best. It's the best. Because movies have a certain thing for me that is irreducible, but no matter how like much the culture will reduce them, you know, and their validity in the culture, like to me, it's the best thing there is.
Yeah. Me too. I think that was kind of the experience that I had once it's like, again, things where you go like, at the time I was super duper excited about it, and it was everything we wanted was to like get into Sundance, for example. Right. And I did realize, and it did feel, this is incredibly cool. This is such a cool achievement. But also a little bit, it's only in retrospect that I go like, oh shit, yeah, we got into Sundance. That's really, really cool. And I think like I experienced around that time a feeling of like, oh, right. And at the time, it felt like a really long time ago, but it's been longer ago now that this was even happening than the amount of time I was thinking about then. Mm-hmm. But being like, oh yeah, like when I was in middle school and high school and IFC was on basic cable at that time, and I would just watch endless indie films, and that was the age of like Tarantino and Kevin Smith and Steven Soderbergh being super venerated as like, and Spike Lee as this is the like vanguard of like independent film, and they all pretty much got started at Sundance, and now I'm there. And I didn't even necessarily mean to. This isn't the track that I necessarily thought would happen, but here I am anyway. Even at the time, I did not take that for granted. Like that was like super cool. And it was like, oh, I didn't even go the quote unquote indie film route, I thought. Right. And I ended up there anyway, was like genuinely very cool. And the just sort of like movies as the irreducible unit of culture in some ways for me was also true as being that thing of just like, oh yeah, a movie like is really, really neat.
Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly. Kermit is all over this fucking thing.
But he's a sponsor.
And I think some of that too was like, like so much of the success of, be it the videos or then the film, our director, who's one of the members of the group, Dan Ekman, and his wife, Maggie McFadden, who was the producer, like sort of like being like, we're going to do this in a certain way and not just kind of like, even when we're making the videos, like set up and just let it roll and kind of whatever. It's like certainly there was some of that, but it was sort of contained within a larger thing. And then when we made the movie, sort of like, no, he's gonna have it storyboarded and be super intentional about what he wants to achieve and not just kind of make it look like a quote unquote, like any comedy where you sort of are like, we're going to put a camera over here, a camera over there, bounce back and forth, whatever, shoot it like 2.5 men.
I don't want to make too much of a plan.
Exactly.
That's never, and sort of going like, ever say that.
And I think there is an important element of people going like, just sort of in general, that people that you would work with going like, well, don't you know that you're just making a little whatever? And then going like, I'm still going to want or ask for it to be better than I should just have to make it. Well, whatever, we're just making a little whatever, so I shouldn't try to make it look good. And always just kind of asking for like, no, I really, really want it to. It's really important to me, is a really hard thing to maintain. And so that, I think, had a lot to do with like all of the stuff that happened with that movie. And still is like, because it's a movie and it exists, is like still baked in there. Yeah. And that's really exciting to me.
I mean, I've seen it a couple of times in past years, but I've watched it again in preparation for this. And I mean, the most conspicuous thing about it is that it is designed and made with a certain intention that really not only is just conspicuous to look at, but like it is in the service of what you guys are doing, which in some ways has real links to like very classic, like 30s, 40s comedy where, you know, you are inhabiting a kind of juvenile reality as adults, which I mean, I tend to be kind of a sucker for that anyway. But like the kind of active will that is required for the characters to continue to look that way and act that way is reflected in the, you know, hang on, I just need to consult with my inner voice to see if I dare to call it the mise en scène. Yes, it is the mise en scène. But you know, like that's why it feels unlike the 90 different super low budget films that arose in the post, you know, indie film boom of the mid 90s. Like I because I was living in Seattle, which was an incredible movie town at that time, I saw all of it. You know, I was obsessive about seeing that stuff. And it was funny because the way it was talked about was always like, it doesn't have to be like official. It doesn't have to even be good. It can be cool or what. Like the things that were championed about that era were not the things that turn out to have been significant about that era, I think. And the reason you cite Tarantino and Steven Soderbergh and I think there was someone else, but let's not talk about that. But like, it's because they are fastidious filmmakers and they have an actual understanding of all of the stuff. I mean, to go back to the couch analogy, even though it's not advertising, the attention paid to all of those details is really what is required, far more than like, hey man, just put the camera over there and we'll just be.
Right. And I think something that would happen too sometimes is after having done that, it's like people mistake the virtue of something or the thing that's happening, something is happening in spite of the limitations for like, well, you must love those limitations.
Right.
So you guys, we don't have to give you any money actually, because you'll just do the little bingity bang and whatever.
Exactly.
And I think that's the kind of, it's sort of like, we're doing something cool in spite of having no money.
Right.
Please give us money.
We'd much rather have money.
And you guys have access to that. And then the sort of decision maker that you're talking to going like, so certainly you love having no money. And that's really where it all happens. Because we would love to not spend any money on whatever.
We're all about you not having money. That's our whole thing.
I think we would experience something, or I've experienced something, or things certainly where people, for whatever reason, like after like Derrick was not a thing anymore and like trying to get things made with Dan and Maggie and myself, like, and we would go into meetings and people, it would always be the feeling of like, we're going to do something different with you guys. And the thing that's different is no money. You know, like sort of.
This is your
like,
office.
It's like, yeah, exactly. There's always the feeling of like whatever decision maker you're talking to, it's like they've been meaning to try something a little out there and a little whatever. And
people in this business think I'm crazy. Yeah, but I think you should work for free.
We're going to try that out on you.
Yeah.
And the thing that we're going to try out is like just some, you know, just sort of a like, well, you've made a virtue of not having anything before, so like surely you love that, where you want to go like, no, please let us do the...
Right. I want the official version.
Yeah, exactly.
That is precisely the thing that so much of the entertainment industrial complex got wrong about YouTube, that they thought, oh, well, we don't have to spend any more money to have things written or even produced. It'll all just be crowdsourced, you know, it'll be free. And they tried it and it didn't work out, you know, and for very good reasons, because people are fucking horrible. But I mean, they're great. People are great, obviously.
And now they're going like, what if we never involved any people at all? What if it was all generated literally inside the computer?
Which is why, like, as much as I mean, of course, I mean, I'm in SAG technically, I think, but like, I'm all for the strike. Like, you know, I grew up as the kid of a union film crew worker. Like, I could not be more on board with what the Writers Guild is doing, what the actors are doing. Like, I'm for it. I'm pro-strike, pro-union, whatever. But I have not yet been able to generate a kind of blood-based fear of what AI portends for the world of writing. I mean, for the world of acting, it maybe is a little different, because I can't think of a really specific example, but I seem to remember when I was a kid and Steven Spielberg would come out with a new movie, serious-minded reviewers would say things like, he just wants to make video games or whatever. And I would see the movie and be like, this is great. What are you talking about? It's nothing like a video game. It's really great. Now, flash forward to like a couple months ago, and I saw the new Indiana Jones movie. The first 45 minutes of it is a video game. Like, it's the thing that you have to watch before the game starts. His face is just animation, essentially. It is incidental that other human beings were physically on screen. They needn't have been for it to have functioned exactly as it functioned. And I found that to be like, there's reason to be concerned about it looking toward the future, but I haven't seen even a glimpse of anything that makes me feel like even the shittiest actor is going to be, you know, replaced in that particular way.
Yeah, I think in a weird way, it's sort of not so much that we go like that, or that anyone, at least for me, is worried about like it will be able to convincingly replace what we now know as like entertainment or art. Right. It's sort of like somebody's going to go like, yeah, well, this is what we're making. Right. Because it's cheaper for us to make it. And you might not like it as much, but what else are you going to watch?
It'll be vaporwave.
But not as charmingly evocative of early 90s screensavers. And that's my complaint. I think we're all just like, we are just going to make early 90s screensavers now, and that's what we're going to put on like TV and in movie theaters. I'm listening.
Right.
I'll watch an orb transform into a cone.
Get me the toaster.
I've been waiting for this call.
Just to keep this on track, thematically, given that this is a show with a theme, technically. I have been at Sundance with a film that I was just an actor in it and had a small part, but it's very hard to go there and not be like, so like, when are they going to lift me up on someone's shoulders? Like, when I'm the breakout star.
Yes.
What is it going to feel like? Am I ready? Like, you know, it's delusion, but like, it is obviously such a part of the narrative of what Sundance is. And you're there with a film that you wrote with your, you know, close collaborators and made in this really scrappy way. It's not like out of the question that when you're walking in there that you're like, this could be it.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't it.
Right.
So let's revisit that process, please.
Absolutely. So we went in there and had been told like, you should go and you should have a like film sales agent. It's basically what it's called. And what they literally do is interface between you guys, the filmmakers, and any potential buyers. And we worked with these two really cool guys named the Bronze. They're brothers. They work at a company called Submarine.
They were the people who represented the film I was there
Nice.
with,
Yeah, there you go. They're the coolest.
Fantastic.
They literally
people.
were in a band with Madonna before she was Madonna. They're like cool downtown, just everything great, like totally cool. But also it's like, and because I think it's partially been like some of what their experience has been doing that, like you're a little bit prepared for like, they're like, well, it can get crazy and like there can be, you're in like a little cabin and everybody's coming through to pitch you on like, here's what we want to do with your movie and whatever. Because it was just, it had like, a blockbuster. I
don't want another bidding war.
Screening, yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
And that can be your experience. That's on the realm of what can happen. And then of course, I think part of having had the trajectory up until that point that like, we had experienced or I had experienced internally sort of feels inevitable because you're like, well, I mean, obviously we've gone from here to here. So the next step is sort of like that we'll be in that cabin and like people will be rolling through being like, it's going to open on 3,200 screens and it's going to be this and it's going to be that. And there were just circumstances outside of our control that affected our experience. Similar in the way to like when we first started putting stuff on YouTube, affected it in a really positive way.
Right.
It was like we just happened to sync up with this rise of this technology that made our thing getting out there without quote unquote gatekeepers possible. Similarly, our experience of then making a like literal movie synced up in a really kind of a negative way with like how movies getting marketed and distributed was evolving.
Right.
And also the fact that it was January of 2009. So like pretty much like right in the middle of, or maybe starting to come out of like the recession.
Right.
And also the previous year, a comedy called Hamlet 2 starring Steve Coogan had sold for a crazy amount. It was like the biggest sale ever in Sundance history.
Christ.
And then didn't like ultimately do very well at the box office. And so people apparently, and we didn't really know this going in, were like gun shy around like comedy. What is it? What do we really, because everybody's always fighting the last war or whatever you want to say.
Right. So that's really funny that your film and that film would have had anything.
So all that to say, right, exactly. But I think people just go, what are the little keywords that I'm supposed to go in watching out for? And I think that year they were watching out for like comedy. We don't know. Definitely don't spend a ton of money on it.
Right.
So all that to say, our movie premiered. It was like a midnight premiere, totally fun. Felt like it went well, getting laughs. And then sort of like, well, I'm not being whisked away to the bidding cabin. What is happening?
Doesn't feel like somebody's shoulders under my ass.
And then the next morning kind of, like talking to the Bronze and being like, what's going on? And then being like, well, we got the next one coming up. And we're like, there wasn't any immediate swarm of buyers. And then that was around the same time that my dad, who was there, was like, you should get on Twitter. I searched your movie on Twitter and like some people saw it and they liked it.
Right.
And that was the first glimmer of like what I think has actually become the life of the movie is like, well, people saw it and they liked it. So that's how we met a ton of like film bloggers who I think at that time were starting to be really influential in a lot of ways. And that's how we met like, for example, like how I met Nathan Rabin, who at the time was a critic for the AV Club, who I had read and loved a ton of.
Great writer.
And got to reach out to him and be like, hey, there's a press and industry screening of our movie tomorrow morning. Will you like go to it? And he was like, oh, sure, I'll check that out. And then he ended up being like a super big champion of the movie that was really cool. So that ended up kind of giving the movie the life that it has now, where it's like, well, people really like it who saw it, and like comedy fans liked it and fans of ours liked it. And that started to be like, okay, there's like an understory of like, Nathan Rabin gave it a really good review and we're able to start getting little pull quotes that say like, hey, this movie's great. So ultimately we did, after the festival, like find a distributor. And even that experience, now I'm like, that was great. That was really cool. And there were some towns like there, and this is where I get to feel like I ever was in a rock band, because it could be like, there were some markets that were great for us,
Right.
Columbia, Missouri, big mystery team town. It really was. like we did.
Columbia, Missouri is weirdly a center of a lot of really great experiences for me as well.
Yeah, I mean, and like Seattle, like there were like places where we just were more like tapped in, or we got some good press, or we got Chicago. Like there were like, we absolutely had like great experiences. And then in New York, where we were from, in LA, like we had good turnouts, and the movie kept getting extended when it was here in New York, and that was really exciting. But also, it just never quite synced up into a like, this movie's catching fire at the indie box office, which can totally be a story as well. Yeah. And it never quite hit that thing. But what did happen with it, it's like the company that picked it up, Roadside Attractions, had what's called an output deal with Lionsgate. So it's like now still bounces around and ends up on streaming services, and what ended up becoming how stuff like this gets seen. Yeah. And that's really lucky.
Instead of having been like on the cult classics shelf at a video store.
Exactly.
Which is what
so it's gotten to have a really cool afterlife, but it was like, it was funny. It was happening at the same time as this movie, Paranormal Activity. You may have heard of it.
I'm familiar.
Where that was a thing where it was like, if you were, this is super self-aggrandizing and incorrect in so many ways, but it was like if you were Rocky watching Ivan Drago, people would be like, he's a really good boxer. He's an underdog story. Like if Ivan Drago's getting all this Rocky press, or it's like, Paranormal Activity really genuinely was independently made initially. But then it got acquired by a big studio, and they were like, we're going to kind of make it have this little like, it's catching fire sort of a story. But it was like, but we knew, we were like, but they got all this Paramount money, so they get to just like create that
fake
story.
Indie.
Exactly.
Even
though it was really independent when it started. And God love them, and God love those ghosts.
So, I mean, it is in a way that experience is like, it's not an unhappy, and like in a way it's, I mean, obviously it's respectable. Obviously, like it is, I mean, it's actually much more in keeping with what used to be the sort of the indie route. It was all that was available. I mean, my first week of being at NYU, I went and saw Slacker, and it really was like there was a wheat-pasted flyer on a telephone pole, and I read it, and I was like, oh, that sounds like and it was being completely mind-blowing how good it was. I loved it. And I because I saw it advertised the way I saw it advertised, I really had the feeling that, oh, someone made a gift for me personally, you know? And I have maintained that relationship with that film. And, you know, a lot of other sort of totems of culture that you experience in a way that it actually matters how you discover it. And like those things really do matter. However, I have also had the experience where a thing I did for no money practically at all blew up and became a huge success. And then the next thing I did had nothing like that success. And I know that the feeling of like, but I mean, it got good reviews. Like it's good. Like people like it, I think, you know, that sense of, it's not necessarily the sort of gilded thing. It's not the sort of big triumphant success that sort of in the part of your brain that is the kid aspiring to a life in the arts, there is always that thing of like, I mean, I would just be happy to get a job. But I mean, if I became globally famous, would I say no to that? But, you know, I think I would be okay with it. That I'm talking sort of about that particular switch that has to flip eventually in order for you to stay sane and keep working in your life.
Right.
Were you bummed in any way by the experience before you embraced what was good about it?
Yeah, I would say so. I think there was definitely a like feeling of, oh, this doesn't feel like it's like building to the way things have prior to this. And I don't think it was until a lot later that I realized like, oh, not even am I necessarily sad about that in this moment, but you realize retroactively, oh, I was sad about that.
Right. No, exactly. I get that.
Like when like around the time or maybe a little bit after like Mystery Team stuff was happening or Derrick stuff was happening, I was talking to my dad and he was like, how's stuff going? And I was like, oh, professionally, like it's awesome. Like things feel like they're happening. Personal life, kind of nothing, not really dating anyone, not whatever. And he just said like, oh yeah, they have a way of switching places. And just at the time you go like, all right,
Sage.
Cool, well, whatever. I hope they don't and just keep having professional success. And I've never experienced the other things. So I kind of have just, like I really had a mental image of, in that way that you just sort of like, you're like, kind of coolly resign yourself to a fate that now if you think about it, you're like, oh, that's horrible. Why would you even wish that upon yourself, much less be like, yeah, I'll probably just be one of those guys.
Much less aspire to it. Yeah.
I really thought to myself like, oh, I'll probably just be that person that's like really like works super hard and is super focused on the stuff, and my personal life will be like kind of a wasteland, but like I'll just be like really successful and I'll just maybe be kind of sad, but I'll be really successful.
Right. I don't have time to worry about it. I love shit.
And I really told myself that, and I was like, oh, great, okay. And then not even really thinking about what the implications of that were. And then what ended up becoming the period of time sort of after Mystery Team and other things, like the next sort of like 10 years of my life was like, oh, getting into and then being into a relationship that became my marriage and now became my family, and getting into therapy and like
being a person.
In a way that makes it sound like a behind the music where it's like after this crazy ride, whatever. And and I'm sort of like walking along like a gravel path next to the beach and like throwing stones into the ocean. Why would I do that?
For those were the times when I carried you, regardless. It doesn't matter what the body of water is.
But like in a way that it didn't feel that way, and it wasn't like, oh, I had a great big crazy ride and now I was like recovering from something. But thinking back on it, it's like in a little bit of a minor key way, it was sort of more like, oh, being and feeling and having emotions and being like, actually I should pay attention to those. And maybe those are even important. Or maybe those are even like the most important.
Right. I mean, but there's a version of that reality in which your emotions are just like riveted to the degree of success you achieve or not. And sort of your emotional life is tied to achievement in that way. And much like your identity or whatever. But this version that you're describing where you're like, oh, right, I have feelings. I must learn what you mean by this. What means this feelings?
Yeah.
Partly it's what you actually have control over or access to. Maybe control is the wrong word, but like it is as much a thing to work on as any sort of career, endeavor.
Right.
Right. Like you have to actually it doesn't just happen any more than show business success just happens. But I mean, a good thing is that it also doesn't sort of magically fly away the way certain other things magically fly away in career world. Was that the end of Derrick?
It was in like, I think we never really like talked about it. Like that was one thing that I sort of realized in the period when I was realizing like, oh, I think I was sad about that. I don't know if I am anymore, but I was. It was the end. There was never a like, all right, it's over. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It was just sort of like, we kind of were in LA, where we had moved. And so we were all kind of like finding our own way. And we ended up, I will say another thing that came out of Mystery Team, and there's a very obvious, like the biggest example of this happening, but there's also like other cool minor key things happened for all of us off of Mystery Team, which was that the Russo brothers, who directed the pilot episode of Community and directed and executive produced a bunch of Community, saw Mystery Team at Sundance, or I think so. Yeah, I think either that or shortly thereafter. Really liked it, and then had pitched Donald to be like, he should maybe be on this show, Community, that we're casting. And we all ended up being on Community in small little parts that was like really fun. And then I ended up they ended up again in that thing of like, then just sometimes somebody calls you and is like, do you want a really cool opportunity? And you're like, I should be able to get cool opportunities under my own, like I just grit it out and I'm in an audition and whatever. But the coolest ones have been just like somebody calling me weirdly. And I think that's true of a lot of people, but feels kind of doesn't feel like you're cheating somehow in the universe.
But I mean, in a universe that is stacked against anyone achieving anything.
Let's just take it, right?
Exactly. I mean, it's not like you were their son.
Right.
Unless I don't object to
that. My 23andMe results are getting here later today.
I mean, you might be their son that they had together.
Right. I do love to cook, and they love to cook. They love food.
It's uncanny.
And I loved being in Captain America: The Winter Soldier, and they loved directing Captain America: The Winter Soldier.
Oh, really? I heard it was kind of a difficult process. No,
but yeah, so I got to like be in like that, or like they put me in like a Smirnoff commercial that they directed that was really fun, or whatever. Like, got to do other things as a result of that came directly out of Mystery Team. So as cleanly in my head as it's nice to go like, and then fucking nothing happened. The phone wasn't ringing.
Right.
Because I did grow up watching a ton of VH1 Behind the Music. So it's like, no, my actual lived experience of it, if I really think about it, was way different, and cool things did happen directly as a result of that. But also as part of that, it's like, then obviously Donald getting super successful. And then I started working with Dan and Maggie, trying to do different projects. Dominic started writing for TV, first in a writing partnership and then on his own. Like, we all went and did different things, but there never was that moment of like, all right, see you guys either later or see you never in this thing. And there was never like a breakup. There was never whatever.
Right.
And in a weird way, I've come to think of it like, because there was never a part where it goes like, and it's over now.
Right.
It took me a longer time to sort of like process like, oh yeah, that was cool. That's over.
It seems like the world of making things has evolved in such a way that overness is maybe not quite as definitive anyway.
Right.
Bands get back together, shows get rebooted, whatever. But like, you really are in pretty good shape until one of the crucial people dies, which is a thing that starts happening around this time of life, which happened to me a few years ago. The bass player for Harvey Danger died. And I mean, he had cystic fibrosis. It was not like a shock that he wound up being hospitalized, but the day he went into the hospital happened to have been the day that I got a call that was like, would you guys consider reuniting to play festivals in England? And I was like, I have literally been waiting for this call for many years. And it was exactly the kind of thing that Aaron, our bass player, would have cherished the most.
Right.
And so when I went to visit him in the hospital and he was intubated and he was barely conscious, I whispered it to him and he really perked up, but he never left the hospital. And I mean, I had not planned to talk about it, but like, those are the only things that are sort of definitive, unless, of course, someone becomes, you know, an asshole or somebody wants to sort of disavow all past work or whatever. But if you are on any kind of friendly terms, the fact is that the thing you once did is all sort of always in the offing potentially if you wanted to, but who knows if you even want to.
For sure. And I think like it would be so fun. Like, there's never any part of me that like disavows that. I just have never, I think like there's a certain part where you realize to somebody that knows you from that because they like your work and they particularly connected with that piece of work. And I've had interactions with people where I realize like, oh, for you, not only was what we made like, I think this really happens, and I've heard a lot of musicians talk about this in interviews, like, not only was that like a thing that you liked, but like that was also a time and a place in your life. So when you think about like me or what we did or the thing that you like, you also think about that time in your life. And that's really, really cool and special.
Yeah.
But also conversely, a little bit in a way that you totally, I feel this way about people whose work I like. It's like you are inside your life. To them, you're sort of a toy that's on a shelf that they haven't seen in a while. And they're like, hey, do you ever think about getting down and playing again in the same way? And you're like, I mean, yeah, but also I'm just out there doing my thing. So that is a little bit where I'm a little bit like, yeah, I would love that. That would be great. But also in the same way that I think like for other people, like I remember hearing on the subway like a year or so ago, woman was playing on like a little Bluetooth speaker, was playing just like a kind of deep cut Destiny's Child song. And another woman, like a middle-aged woman, sat down and was kind of just like vibing with the music. And they were just sort of like acknowledging to each other like, oh God, love this song. And one of the women said, I wish they would go back together. And you think about Beyonce, right?
Yeah.
Like you think about like, oh my God, this is the biggest artist in the world and is just completely cutting her own path and doing her own thing. And there's still a woman on the subway who's like, I wish they would do Destiny's Child again. Like to her, Beyonce is not the same if she's not in that that configuration where you just think like, but from Beyonce's perspective, I'm sure it's like, what?
Why would I do that?
I'm out doing this whole other thing. And in your mind, with that woman, she's just like, this gives me the feeling. I like this. And so I get that.
It has so much to do with who you were, and who you were remains part of who you are. Maybe you guys should reunite on the picket line.
That would
I get an associate producer credit.
Yes, exactly. That would be, yeah. I like the idea in a sort of a sitcom-y way that the industry ends up reforming itself around just getting cool picket line entertainment to happen.
Yeah.
And just now that's what it is.
No cameras.
Yeah, no, that would be really neat. And it's like, it is a weird feeling because I think from being inside of it, you do feel like a little bit like when somebody's like, oh man, that would be really cool, or if you guys did that or whatever, you're like, but I'm doing stuff.
Right.
You know?
Well, I mean, I know that it's complicated when someone you have worked with goes on to not only make, like when they make stuff, you have your response to it, and you can be critical or you can be celebratory, whatever. You have your thoughts and feelings about it. But when they then go on to become not merely famous, but like acclaimed beyond measure, and in a way that, in my opinion, like Atlanta is one of the greatest things I've ever seen on television, ever. And I've seen a fair amount of television, and I love his music. Like, he is a major guy, major talent. But you have a perspective on him because you worked with him that is really specific and really, it is yours. Right. And I mean, frankly, how does it feel? I mean, I'm not, this isn't digging to ask for like, how bad did it burn you? I'm really curious what that feels like.
Well, it would feel differently if he wasn't talented or incredibly hardworking.
Yeah.
And so you just go like, yeah, that was never not going to be the trajectory. None of it has ever been like surprising to me. Mm-hmm. And we're in sporadic touch, and it's great and it's friendly, almost in that way where I'm like, I think like there's that feeling a little bit of like, gosh, if there was that behind the music sort of like, and then somebody throws a Heineken bottle and it shatters and somebody like screams and off on a motorcycle, would have been a little more psychologically like, okay, cool, I get that.
Right.
And would have been bad in other ways too, because I'm like, I'm glad everybody's still like cool.
Yeah.
But next to somebody who is a polymath and all of the things that they are a polymath at, it's like, are wildly successful at, and then being a polymath of less outstanding sort of breakout success in all endeavors, and going like, yeah, but should I just be a math? Should you just be a math for a while and just kind of really drill down on one thing? But I can't seem to do it.
Yeah.
I keep thinking I'm doing it. And then, like I said, I'm like, well, I have this cartoon that I put out every week where I'm like, what are you doing?
Right.
Stop. But then you kind of have to be like, this is who you are.
Right.
You like doing all these things. Insofar as you have the time to do them and the inclination and they're exciting to you, do them. And if that's not exactly what some sort of like TikTok success guru who's really just like selling supplements would prescribe to you as like the pathway to like ultimate maxing out your success, like that might just be it. I don't know. And I really do go back and forth on that, where I'm like, I think it's great that I do all these things. And then I also go like, should you just, but it keeps happening.
I mean, it's not as though the many things are unconnected. I mean, they are all, like, they may seem multidisciplinary, but really writing, performing, drawing, singing, podcasting, like, it's like they are all essentially, if they're not the same exact muscles, they certainly all come from the same root in some way, which used to be, I must demonstrate my existence. I must be valued. And now it's just like, in every sense, this is just who I am. Yeah. And I am doing what I do because I am what I do. And I can't solve that equation. But like, I don't know better things to do. Right. There's nothing else I would rather do.
Yeah, I think that's how a lot of people feel now too, where it's sort of like we were talking about before we started rolling about like, I have all this stuff. And they keep making me migrate to different platforms just to give away my stuff for free. Yeah. Where I always have in my head, like, but it's to create a platform where I could promote when I then have something they can pay for, then that's what I'll do. And that's what I've done in the past. And that's what I will hope to do in the future. Like if I have another book, for example, that's usually my version of it. It's like, well, I want to try to maintain some sort of like way to reach people who like what I do, because the next time I want them to pay for something, I want them to, and they might like to know about it too. So I want to have that. But then in the meantime, it seems like the way to keep that channel open between you and them is just like firing a bunch of free stuff that you make, or not free stuff, but stuff that you make without any expectation of making money off of it. And then they also keep those platforms keeping like, hey, guess what? Fuck you.
Yeah.
Fuck
As
you,
to
man.
the users of the
Yes,
platforms.
exactly. That feels really bad.
Yeah.
Because you're just like, I just want to stay in touch with the people that like what I do.
And not disappear completely.
Right.
And also, this is funny. This idea I had is funny. Send, like, I don't want to wait 6 months to put up a show to do it.
Yeah.
Surely having a child must affect you and the decisions you make in that regard in a way that your own personal sort of self-interest wouldn't maybe not have. How have you found that? I know your child is still young.
Right.
Well, she's 2 and a bit. Mm-hmm. But like, you have to provide for her.
Right. I think that it has affected it tremendously because it's no longer theoretical. Like you always sort of know in the back of your head, like, I need to make money and sustain myself in an economy or whatever. But then now realizing like, oh, it doesn't just affect me. And if I decide like, I want to just completely go away for 7 years and write this book in the woods in Russian that then somebody else will translate back into English. And then that will be my sort of magnum opus. And if nobody ever reads it, that's fine. That I can still do that, but that decision will have consequences for somebody that isn't me.
Right.
Where I could just decide like, yeah, whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. I'll just like walk into the river if I need to bathe or whatever. And then, but when you're going like, hey, kid, you need to walk into the river if you want to bathe. Like,
right. If you want to see your daddy, he'll be in the river learning Russision.
From the river, from that babbling Slavic river. Yeah, exactly. Just that has implications for somebody besides you, so that you might want to, and I was already kind of this way anyway, like you might want to at the very least strike a balance between making a living and trying to establish your family with some sort of like material comfort versus truly just going like, well, whatever, fuck it. If I never do anything that ever makes any money, I can
sleep in the bushes.
Right.
But that's different though from the cliche, which is when are you going to quit dicking around with your books and your comedy and your acting and get a real job selling insurance?
Right.
When are you going to do that?
That is, I think, like a voice that either an insistent voice that's either louder or quieter at any given moment. And for me, it really is like, I think it is that I literally never at a certain point was like, if you even hear it, you've lost.
Yeah.
Has for me become like, I would then, I guess, try to work in a kitchen in a restaurant or do catering or something. Like, the idea that I would ever even say that out loud, that I've ever even thought of it, I feel like 10 years ago I would be like, well, you truly should just be dust.
Right.
And I don't feel that way anymore because I have to at least acknowledge that like truly now with like we were talking about, all the stuff that has made these kind of general, what makes a life in the arts risky questions have now become so much more aggressive and or pernicious or feel so much more relevant and not just about the day-to-day vagaries of having a career or not having a career in this. That's something I could even remotely fathom. But there's a lot of things like that. I don't know, because that also makes it sound so
like
shitty. Because these are people's lives. These are the things that most people do, and like that's cool. Like I don't want to be like a weird artsy elitist person who's like, oh, if I had to go, whatever. It's like I think that's so lame.
Oh, I know someone who left his wife and 2 children because being a father was cramping his art.
And it's a weird thing where you go like, if that was what you did, then that was maybe for the best for everybody. Right. If that was how you were going to feel, I think, and the person that you were going to be or not be around those people, it's like better that you just do, you know. But for me, it sort of is a like, I think now to know that I want to be somebody that's like taking care of a family, I have to have some awareness of like, if this all goes away, you could still make a living and go like, yeah, I would try. It wouldn't just be like, I have to go to the river now.
Yeah. Because I understand that working in a kitchen is not very stressful or time consuming.
No, and you definitely get to be around your family a lot. That's what I've learned from Top Chef.
Absolutely. Well, season 3 of The Bear beckons.
I was just thinking about No, I was just thinking about your song, Little Round Mirrors. That's about sort of a like person who is like one of my most recommended songs where I'm just like, hey, you want to hear the best song ever? And is a song about where it's like, what is the line between fan and artist?
And victim.
And it's an increasingly blurred
of
line.
Obsession, by the way. Like, it is. It's blurry.
And it continues to be more and more that. And now I think it's something where everybody feels like, wait, are we all just out there in the wilderness and it literally is just 7 billionaires who get to make all the decisions? Like we always kind of knew that was that to a degree, but now it's just
now it is actually 7 of them.
Yeah, literally 7 people.
It's amazing how sort of the industry, whatever the industry is in specific, how it asserts itself on all versions of endeavor, even and especially the ones that feel they are totally independent of industry,
right.
That they are just about people's will and people's taste and personal expression. Even that is often a sort of, you're still a mark, you know?
Maybe I'm like part of the problem where I was ahead of the curve on that, because when I was like 6, like I said, my dad and both my parents worked in technology, and so they would come back home from trade shows with like, hey, here's a giant t-shirt that I got for free that you can wear to bed that has like Windows 3.1 on it. And I really was like I was not a fan of, even like today where you have like people that are fans of like, oh, you might be a fan of this video game company that makes video games that you like or whatever.
You were a fan of MS-DOS.
I was a fan, yeah. I was a fan of Microsoft. How, as
I like
a
their early
6-year-old.
shit.
Yeah, exactly. Like no 7-year-old should know who Steve Ballmer is.
Right.
But that, I think now has kind of become everything, where it's sort of like you have people who are literally like, no, this corporation or this person at the head of this corporation literally can never be wrong. It's like, wait, do you work for them? Are you?
Right.
You're just like, no, I don't. I really don't. I just draw a sense of like, I guess it speaks to how much we like need identity or whatever, that people would draw it from that. But, you know, also I get it because I'm a 6-year-old who knew
It's all that's
Ballmer
left.
was. Yeah,
it's all that's left because everything else has been ravaged and burned, as a great man once said. This has been really great. Thank you very much for being so voluble and so open. And there's probably another hour or two that I feel like we could easily exhaust. But let's keep it on the 4 to 5 hour side for this first one. DC Pierson, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Sean. What a pleasure and honor. I really appreciate you having me.